Naomi was 21 years old, lying inside a structure she built for $147.63. Outside, it was 11 degrees and the wind was tearing at the walls. The corrugated metal on the roof was groaning under a crust of ice that had been building all night. 6 months earlier, she had been sleeping in the back seat of a rusted Chevy Cavalier with everything she owned in a garbage bag. But on this night, she was inside something she built from nothing, and the only question in her mind was whether it would survive until morning. 5 weeks before the first wall went up, Naomi had never touched a circular saw. She didn't know what a joist was. She had $150, a cracked phone with a YouTube habit, and the back seat of a car she'd been sleeping in for 2 months since getting kicked out of her family home with no savings and no plan. After 3 weeks of burning through every couch she could crash on, and 2 months of parking behind laundromats to sleep, she decided to stop waiting for someone to let her inside their walls and build her own. She found the idea on YouTube, a video about a man who built a tiny cabin in the woods for $200. She watched the whole thing lying in the back of the Cavalier, using Wi-Fi leaking out of a nearby coffee shop. Then she watched another one and another. Within a week, she'd gone down a full rabbit hole of tiny home builds, pallet wood construction, and off-grid living content. Regular people were building actual shelters, small ones, but real structures with roofs and doors and insulation for almost nothing. So she set a goal: build a small structure for under $150, using as much free and salvaged material as she could find. No construction experience, no crew, no safety net. Just stubbornness and whatever her hands could figure out. This is exactly how she did it. And what happened when the worst ice storm of the winter tried to take it all down? The first problem was land. You cannot just put a structure anywhere you want. But Naomi remembered an elderly man who lived a few blocks from where she grew up. He had a double lot, and the back half was nothing but weeds and cracked concrete. She walked up to his front porch, knocked on the door, and asked if she could put a small garden shed on the back of his property in exchange for keeping the entire lot mowed and maintained. He said yes. No lease, no paperwork, just a handshake. That handshake turned out to be worth more than any rental agreement she could have signed. Next came materials. Naomi started driving to the back of every grocery store, warehouse, and distribution center in a 15-mile radius, hunting for wooden pallets. Businesses toss these away constantly. They pile up behind loading docks by the dozens, and most managers are happy to let you haul them off just to free up the space. Over 3 weeks, she collected more than 40 pallets. She strapped them to the roof of the Cavalier, crammed them into the back seat, and made trip after trip until she had a full pile of raw lumber sitting on that back lot. Now you might be wondering why she didn't just go to a shelter. Naomi actually tried. She visited 2 of them. The first had a waiting list and a curfew that conflicted with her night shifts. The second was overcrowded and loud, and within 20 minutes of walking in, she watched 2 people get into a screaming match over a bunk. Naomi decided her rusted Cavalier with the broken heater was a safer bet. And that is a call that might sound extreme, but anyone who has actually been inside an underfunded shelter at capacity gets it immediately. So she had a pile of pallets and absolutely no idea how to turn them into a building. She spent hours watching construction tutorials on that cracked phone screen, learning how to frame a wall using pallet lumber, how to notch boards together without fancy joinery, and how to layer cardboard, carpet padding, and foam sheeting into surprisingly effective insulation. But watching a tutorial and actually doing the work with your own hands are 2 completely different things. The first wall she framed came out crooked. She had to tear the whole thing apart and start over, which burned an entire day. The second attempt went better, but one of the pallet boards split clean down the middle when she drove a nail through it, and she didn't have enough spare lumber to replace it. She had to drive 40 minutes to find another stack of pallets and rebuild that section from scratch. Her hands were blistered for the first 2 weeks. She smashed her thumb with a hammer so hard the nail turned black and eventually fell off. There were nights she sat on an overturned crate on that empty lot, staring at her half-built structure, wondering if she was completely out of her mind. But day by day, something started to click. Naomi grew up on the east side of a mid-sized Midwest city, a black neighborhood where the factories closed in the 90s and the jobs never came back. She started working at 15 bussing tables at a fast food restaurant. By 17, she had a second job stocking shelves at a discount grocery store on weekends. She was not saving for college. She was helping keep the lights on at a house that was always one argument away from falling apart. That background didn't teach her construction, but it taught her something more useful: how to keep working. When the work feels pointless, how to solve problems nobody else is going to solve for you, and how to push through the kind of tired that makes your whole body feel like concrete. Those skills translated directly to a vacant lot with a pile of free pallets. First came the floor platform. Raised off the ground on cinder blocks she found stacked behind an abandoned gas station. Then the wall frames, slowly getting more square with each attempt. Then the roof, which she covered with a blue tarp and later upgraded to corrugated metal sheeting she picked up at a scrapyard for $20. She talked her way into a carpet store that was remodeling and walked out with a truckload of carpet scraps they were about to throw in a dumpster. She found a half-used roll of plastic sheeting at a yard sale for $5. She bought a box of screws and nails for $12, and she scored 4 used single-pane windows from a house being demolished 2 towns over. Free. Her design was straightforward: 64 square feet, 8 by 8. A peaked roof to shed rain and snow. One door made from pallet boards bolted to $6 hinges. 4 salvaged windows, and walls built from double-layered pallet wood with carpet scraps and cardboard stuffed into every gap. The total cost when she added it all up was $147.63. Everything else was donated, salvaged, or rescued from somebody's trash pile. By late September, 5 weeks after she started, the structure was standing. It was not pretty. The walls were slightly uneven. The door stuck when it rained. One window had a crack across the bottom corner, sealed with silicone caulk. But it was a real shelter. 4 walls, a roof, a door that locked, and enough room for a sleeping bag, a couple of plastic bins, a small pallet table, and a folding chair. For the first time in months, Naomi had a place she could call her own. But having a shelter and actually surviving a winter inside it are 2 very different things. October hit and the temperatures started falling. Naomi knew she had maybe 4 to 6 weeks before the serious cold rolled in, and her tiny structure was not even close to ready. You could see daylight through gaps in the walls. The floor was frigid even with carpet scraps laid across it. The single-pane windows were basically decorative, bleeding heat as fast as a propane heater could push it out. She threw herself into winterizing. 2 rolls of heavy-duty plastic sheeting stapled over every window, trapping a dead air pocket between the glass and the plastic as a crude form of double glazing. She used expanding foam from a friend who did construction work, filling every crack and seam. A second layer of carpet scraps covered the floor. A sheet of reflective emergency blanket material slid under her sleeping pad to bounce body heat back up. Her only heat source was a portable propane heater, the camping kind rated for indoor use. $40 at a second-hand shop. She stockpiled 1-pound propane canisters whenever they went on sale and stored them in a ventilated box outside the door. And then November arrived, and the Midwest did what the Midwest does. If you are finding this story worth your time, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every single week. The first real cold snap hit in the second week of November. 14 degrees outside. Inside the tiny home, with the propane heater running full blast. It was 41 degrees. Naomi lay in her sleeping bag, wearing 2 layers of thermals, a hoodie, wool socks, and a knit cap, and she could still feel the cold seeping through the fabric and into her bones. She did not sleep that first night. She lay in the dark, listening to the wind hammer the pallet wood walls, hearing the tarps on the roof flap and crack against the corrugated metal, wondering if the whole thing was going to blow apart before sunrise. Every creak sounded like something breaking. Every gust felt like an exam she had not studied for. But morning came. The walls were still standing, and Naomi was still breathing. That first cold snap was just the preview. December was worse. There was a 9-day stretch where the temperature never climbed above 20 degrees. The propane heater was chewing through canisters faster than she had planned for, and she started rationing. On the worst nights, she would run the heater for 45 minutes, shut it off, and bury herself in the sleeping bag until the temperature inside dropped low enough that she had to fire it up again. She ate canned soup heated on top of the propane canister. She read library books by flashlight under the covers. She did push-ups and squats inside the tiny room to keep her blood moving, working out in a space where she could touch both walls if she stretched her arms wide. Then January brought the real crisis. A PVC pipe she had rigged from a rain barrel to bring water closer to the structure froze solid and cracked open. When the temperature rose just enough for a partial thaw, water poured out around her door. It froze again overnight and turned the ground into a sheet of ice. Naomi lost her main water supply. For the next 2 weeks, she hauled gallon jugs from a gas station 1.5 miles away, carrying them in a backpack through frozen streets. 40 minutes each way, every other day. In January, in the Midwest. And then the ice storm hit. In the last week of January, freezing rain coated the entire region in a thick crust of ice. Trees cracked and fell across power lines. Whole blocks went dark. And the roof of Naomi's tiny home, the one she had framed with pallet lumber and covered with screws, a tarp, and corrugated metal sheeting, started groaning under the weight. She heard it in the middle of the night. A slow, deep creaking sound from the peak of the roof, like something bending past the point it was meant to bend. She pulled on her boots, grabbed a flashlight, and climbed out into the freezing rain. Ice was forming on the corrugated panels faster than it could slide off. The metal was bowing inward. Naomi grabbed a broom, climbed up on a plastic crate, and spent the next 2 hours standing in the freezing rain in the dark, swinging that broom at her roof, knocking ice loose one section at a time. She was soaked to the bone within minutes. Her hands went numb before the first hour was done, but she kept swinging, because she knew that if that roof caved in, she had absolutely nothing left. By the time she got back inside, her clothes were frozen stiff against her skin. She stripped everything off, climbed into the sleeping bag, cranked the propane heater to maximum, and shook violently for close to an hour before she could feel her fingers again. The roof held. One of the corrugated panels had a new dent pushed inward from the weight. But it held. If you have ever stood in the dark trying to save something you built with your own hands, you know exactly what that moment felt like. February ground on. The days got a little longer, but the cold didn't let up. Naomi settled into a routine built around 3 things: conserving heat, hauling water, and keeping her own mind together. She filled a notebook with journal entries by flashlight. She drew sketches of a better version of the structure, one with real insulation and a proper subfloor. Then, on a cold afternoon in early March, something unexpected happened. A woman who lived 3 houses down from the lot walked over carrying a paper bag full of groceries. They had never spoken before. The woman said she had been watching Naomi come and go through the snow all winter, and had finally decided she needed to do something. Over the next few weeks, 2 more neighbors followed. One brought a heavy wool blanket. Another ran an extension cord from his garage and carried over a space heater. These people had watched her survive 4 months of winter before saying a word. Naomi was not bitter about it. She understood. People don't always know what to do when they see someone living like that. They're not sure if help is wanted. They worry about crossing a line. But when they saw that she was still there every morning, still walking to work, still coming home to that tiny structure every night, still standing, it moved something in them that had been sitting still all winter. Spring arrived in late March. The snow melted off the lot. The ice finally cleared from around her door. And one warm morning, Naomi walked outside, stood in the sun with her eyes closed, and stayed there for 20 minutes, feeling the heat on her face. She had done it. She had built a shelter for under $150 and survived a Midwest winter inside it. No running water, no electricity for most of it, and insulation that would have given a building inspector nightmares. Just stubbornness, a pile of free pallets, and the kind of refusal to quit that doesn't make for a good montage, but makes for an actual life. That spring, she started upgrading. She pulled off the old tarp and replaced it with proper roofing felt under the corrugated metal. She framed a second layer on the walls and filled the cavity with fiberglass insulation she found on clearance for $35. She ran the neighbor's extension cord permanently and swapped the propane heater for a small electric one. She even built a tiny porch out of leftover pallet wood, just wide enough for a single lawn chair. The structure was never going to be a dream home. It was not going to end up in a magazine. But it was hers. She built every inch of it with her own hands. She survived a winter inside it that would have broken most people. And it gave her the one thing she needed most: enough stability to save money from her job, start looking at real apartments, and plan a future that did not involve the back seat of a rusted car. Naomi's story is not a fairy tale. There was no billionaire who showed up with a check, no GoFundMe that went viral overnight. She just worked, built, and refused to quit when quitting was the easier option every single day. And that is the part of these stories that never makes the highlight reel. Everyone wants the transformation montage and the before and after thumbnail. But the reality of pulling yourself out of homelessness looks like hauling water jugs through frozen streets at 6 in the morning, swinging a broom at your roof in a rainstorm at 2 in the morning, and rationing propane because the canister you bought last week is almost empty, and payday is still 3 days away. It is not glamorous, but it is the kind of thing that actually changes a life. If you know someone who needs to hear a story like this, send it their way. If you want more of these every week, hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.